Welcome everyone to Fundamentals of Kabbalah and Chassidut. We are continuing our series, The Life and Teachings of the Baal Shem Tov. I believe this is our 19th class. This is one of the longest series we've done, and we've been doing this for about 3 years. I think this is the longest series that we've had. And the truth is we could go on and on and on and on. I'm not sure exactly how much farther we're going to take it, but the last approximately 4 classes, we've been focusing exclusively on the Baal Shem Tov's teachings about prayer. So we are going to continue to do that tonight. But what I want to start adding are stories from the Baal Shem Tov, short stories. Here we're learning about prayer, so all the stories will be about prayer. I think maybe just this week and next week we will be dealing with the Baal Shem Tov and prayer, and then we'll move on to other ideas, other teachings of the Baal Shem Tov. So we have been learning from Amuda Tefillah. And I know that at least Dara and maybe others have the book. I've been reading it in Hebrew and then translating it into English. Some of the ones that we're doing tonight, the Hebrew is not so simple. And I will read parts of them and just explain the rest of it. So we're going to start with Kuf Aleph. So it says, "B'tefila tzrich liyot kamo mufshat megashmiut ve'einenu margish mitziuto ba'olam hazeh." So we talked about this before. The Baal Shem Tov, of course, is talking on a very, very high level. And he says that in prayer, a person needs to divorce themselves from physicality, and as if they don't feel their presence in this world. In other words, to get to a place that's really in a certain way above intellect and emotion and physicality. Yes, Toby is asking that we dedicate the learning to her daughter's refuah. Adel should have a refuah shlema. Toby should have lots of strength, and she should have the refuah shlema that has been coming for a long time. B'ezrat Hashem, it will come very soon. Adel Sarachaya Bat Tova should have a full refuah to nefesh, but refuah to guf. Okay, anyone who wants to see, her name is in the chats. Okay, so again, the Baal Shem Tov is talking on a very high level. There are many, many, many stories of not just the Baal Shem Tov, many tzaddikim who would pray for hours, and they would be truly divorced from this world. They would be in another world altogether. So it's here when we're learning about this, it's each one of us can have a little taste of this. That in our prayers, it doesn't mean that we have to be there all the time or for hours at a time, but there are moments when we can really focus on the words that we're saying, our intention with the words, the meaning, and really, really rise above this world. And we know that in the Amidah, there are 2 places. Every blessing during the Amidah, one can stay in that bracha for as long as they want, and add all kinds of kavanot and feelings. But the 2 places is when we when we say Shema Kolenu, God, hear our voices. And the blessing is Shomea Tefillah, the God who hears prayer. So we're told that that's the place that a person could put in their own prayers. And for many people, this is the place where they can rise above the words and just connect directly with God. And then at the end of the Amidah, before taking the 3 steps back, that's also a time that we can get beyond this world. Okay, but now I wanted to read this one in particular is because the Baal Shem Tov is known for innovative explanations of verses or teachings in the Talmud or the Mishnah. And he would come up with these amazing explanations that no one had really heard before. So in Pirkei Avot, in the first chapter, so Hillel HaZaken says, Im ein ani li mili. If I am not for myself, who is for me? Bim ani la'atzmi ma ani. But if I'm only for myself, what am I? Bim lo achshav ematai. And if not now, when? This is a very, very well-known, famous quote from Hillel HaZaken, full of deep meaning in the most simple sense, the literal sense, psychological sense, the emotional sense. But listen to how the Baal Shem Tov explains this teaching. So he starts with Im ein ani li mili. If I am not for myself, who will be for me? So again, very simply, it means that a person has to stand up for themselves, has to take responsibility for themselves. No one else is going to do it for us. If I don't do it for myself, no one else is going to do it. So the Baal Shem Tov says like this, Klomar, Kishani avo lemadriga shelo eda ergish klal im anili. So he says, based on what he said before about rising above physicality. So he says that when I come to a level that I don't know and I don't feel at all my own ego, I'm not egocentric at this moment. I've gotten above that. I'm connecting directly to God. I'm in a state of devekut, of clinging to God. So he says, Hainu, imani ba'olam hazeh, imla. I don't even know if I'm in this world or not. I'm just clinging to God, and I have no other thought other than that. So he says, Vadai ein li shum pachad mimachshavot zarot. If I'm in that state where, now going back to what Hillel HaZaken said, im ein ani li, in other words, if I'm not aware of my own self, then I have no fear of distractions during prayer. I have no fear of what are called strange thoughts during prayer. Ki eza machshava zara yikarev alai. What negative forces can even attach themselves to me because I, in a sense, am not there. Im ein ani li. If I'm not there, then I can't have this opposite negative force trying to distract me from my learning. Already, this is a very innovative explanation. V'zehu mili. So that's what it means, mili, like who can come close to me? What strange thought can even come close to me? Otzelamar, eza machshava zara yavo li. the negative forces have nothing to attach themselves to because I'm egoless at this moment. Aval, but kishani la'atzmi, this is the second statement from Hillel. But if I am for myself, meaning I am full of ego right now, I'm full of self. If I think of myself as like this very important being, entity, and I'm so important in this world, as adarabba, eneni nechshav leklum, on high, I'm not thought of as anything. I'm sorry. So in other words, it's like paradoxical. If I'm full of myself, like what am I? I'm just a big ego trying to function in this world. מה אני חשוב ומה עבודתי חשובה לפניו יתברך שמו. כי אז יבלבלו אותי מחשבות זרות. Then plenty of negative forces can come against me. When I'm full of myself, אם אני לעצמי, then we should worry about strange thoughts during davening. That's as far as I'm going to read here. He continues. Ki ikar briat adam ba'olam hazeh, because the main thing a person is created for in this world, hu la'avodat Hashem, this is to serve God. This is what we are doing here. V'harei ein ani yachol la'avod avodato machmat machshavot zarot ma'abablim oti. But if I am being distracted by all kinds of strange thoughts, fantasies, false imaginations, how can I serve God? How can I serve God? So that's one idea from the Baal Shem Tov. So here we see, and this, we have to remember the Baal Shem Tov initiated the Hasidic movement. So many of his basic teachings became the foundation of Hasidic thought. So here we see a number of things, and especially the idea of when we're praying, now obviously we're asking God for certain things, but what we're going to see soon is that the Baal Shem Tov taught, and it was carried on by all Chassidut, and it goes back to the first thing that we learned about Sohar Ta'aseh Teva, make the words of prayer shine, make them shine. And remember, it was taken from the instructions how to make the ark. And remember, it said that it should be 3 stories, and you should finish it to 1 amma from the top. There should be like a railing or a gutter from the top. El amma milamala, up to an amma, 1.5 feet from the top. And the Baal Shem Tov said, don't read it amma, read it ima, the Shekhinah, that all of our prayers should be directed to the Shekhinah. And hopefully we'll get to it tonight where he's going to say it explicitly here. And this became a very, very big part of Hasidic prayer, even though we are praying for good health, we're praying for parnasa in the Amidah. We're praying for redemption. We're praying to be able to do tshuva. We're praying for wisdom, understanding, and knowledge. We're praying for Jerusalem. We're praying for to be among the tzaddikim. Everything that we're praying for, but in Chassidut is we should take our personal prayers and always tie it to the Shekhinah. And because just like we're in exile, the Shekhinah is in exile. And so therefore, we want to do tshuva, because if we do tshuva, it will help lead to the redemption, and that will bring the end of the exile of the Shekhinah. Just like we're in exile, God's presence in this world is in exile. So the Baal Shem Tov was very, very strong that even if we have personal prayers, it should always be part of our desire to serve God, just like he just said here. That is what we're doing in this world. So even if we're praying for, let's say, parnasa, livelihood, so it should be that I have livelihood so that I can serve you properly, that I can take care of my family, I can take care of educating my children, I can give tzedakah, I can have beautiful ritual objects. So when I make kiddush for you, God, it will be in the most beautiful cup in order to honor you, God, and the Shekhinah. So that's just an example that everything, according to the Baal Shem, should be directed to the Shekhinah, including our own personal needs and desires. I want to do tshuva so I can serve you better. I want wisdom, understanding, and knowledge so I can learn Torah better to serve you better. So that's the idea of this first idea here. Now we're going to Kuf Gimel. This is a relatively short one. So Shemati Memori, so the person who's giving this over says, I learned from my teacher, the Baal Shem Tov, an explanation of the verse, Tachin libam takshiv aznecha. You should prepare, or we really, in a certain way, we should prepare our hearts, and God, you should pay attention and you should hear our prayer. So here's what the Baal Shem Tov says about this. V'rotzeh lamar, ki siman zeh masur biyad adam. That this type of preparing our hearts so that God will listen, this is in our hands to do. She'im yizdamen she'yachol la'achin libo lehitpalel lefanav yitbarach shemo b'li shum machshava zara. So if a person, following up what we just learned, a person should enter into prayer in a state of great humbleness, in a state of wanting to connect to God, wanting to cling to God, wanting to help rectify the world. Then, and we prepare our hearts to pray in that manner. So he says that this will lead to b'li shum machshava zara al kol panim, o b'techilu rechimu kol echad lefi madrigato. That we prepare our hearts with love and awe of God, each one according to their ability. In other words, we're not all the same. We're not all as learned. We're not all as open-hearted, but everyone can do what they can do to pray to God with love and awe. And he says that will lead to not being bothered by strange thoughts. If we have the right, call it attitude, the right headspace going into prayer. So then he says, Az yada ki nikabla tefillah. In other words, if a person gets to their prayer and is not distracted and their mind isn't wandering all over the place, but they're connected, they're full of love and awe, they're saying the words and with meaning and kavanah. So he says, then a person can know that their prayer is being received. That's what it means. When a person prepares their heart, then we can expect in a certain way that God will pay attention and he will hear. And therefore, a person, sometimes when they finish praying, they can have this feeling, I really feel, it doesn't mean that God will give me immediately everything I pray for. That's not the point here. But the feeling that I prepared my heart, I gave it my all, and I really feel like God listened, that God paid attention, that God is hearing, and God will reply any way that he's going to reply. So this reminded me of a story in the Talmud. I didn't have time to look it up, so I'm just telling it in general. I don't remember all of the details, but it's about Hanina ben Dosa. Hanina ben Dosa was a very, very colorful sage. There are many, many stories about Hanina ben Dosa. He was extremely poor, and there are many stories about how he dealt with being so poverty-stricken. But nonetheless, he was considered a great sage. And here's where I'm missing. One of the great sages, I believe their son was sick. And all their prayers did not seem to be helping. And so he went to Hanina ben Dosa and asked him to pray for his son. Hanina ben Dosa prayed for him and said, your son will be fine. He went back home. Sure enough, a miraculous recovery. And so the sage asked Hanina ben Dosa, how did you know? You prayed and you said very confidently, your son will be fine. How did you know? So he answered, and it's not exactly what the Baal Shem Tov says, but I believe that it influenced what the Baal Shem Tov just said here. He said very simply, he said, when the words flow from my mouth totally naturally, and like I'm not even thinking about every word that I'm saying, it's just flowing. I'm sure everyone understands on a certain level that sometimes like we break our head over our prayers and we can't concentrate and our minds are all over the place. And other times it really flows. So Hanina ben Dosa said to him, when I pray like that, I know that my prayer will be received. But if I'm not praying, if it's not flowing, then I'm not so sure. I don't know what will happen with the prayer. So that's very similar to what the Baal Shem Tov is saying here. It says if you prepare your heart and you pray sincerely, humbly, and you keep focused on the prayers, you don't get sidetracked, and you pray, and he uses the words with love and fear, meaning awe, love and awe, then you can expect that God will pay attention and hear. That's what the verse says. God will pay attention and will hear. So that's a beautiful one. Now we go to Kuf Hey, but only in the middle. We're starting with the word Lechain. It's right in the middle. Everyone's book might be different. It's around 8 or 10 lines down. And here he gives over a very basic idea, especially his great-grandson, Rabbi Nachman, picked up on this like really strongly. So here's what he says. Im ish pashut bali palel lifnei HaKadosh Baruch Hu asher gam belav hachi tefilato einenu kol kach kahogen velo ta'aseh behem rosha. In other words, a person is davening and they're praying to Hashem, but they're not full of kavana. They're doing it. It's an obligation. I'm praying. So he says, Einenu kol kach kahogen, and let's say he's falling over the words and he's not saying them clearly. V'lo ta'aseh behem rosha, that this kind of praying will not leave any kind of impression, meaning it will have no effect in this world or the upper worlds. So listen what he says though. So if a person is davening like this, so he says, "Az manichinoto ve'en bebabalimoto kolkach." So the opposite forces of negativity, of strange thoughts, of distractions, they won't even bother dealing with him because his prayer is like so weak, is not leaving any impression. So like from the side of negativity, like why bother? Why bother? This person isn't going anyplace at all with their prayer. So why should we invest our energy in trying to confuse him? So then he continues, Masha ein kain, be'ish hayira. But this is not true with someone who has true awe and fear of God. Asher tefilato ta'aseh pri. It's a person whose prayers are going to leave an impression. Az manichim, will leave a fruit. Taseh pri lamata, v'shorsh lamala. It will have an effect. It will give fruit down here below and up above. Az mitgabrim hasitra achra b'chol yecholat lemebalbalinoto b'machshavat zarot. Then call it the other side, the side of negativity, strange thoughts. They will put their whole being into trying to confuse this person's prayer. Why? Because this person's prayer is going to make a difference. And so we've quoted this verse so often. Zeh le'umat zeh asa Elokim. This against this, God has made. In other words, everything in the world is balanced, a measure for measure. So here, this is a very, very important idea because many, many people think as a person becomes more and more spiritual, more and more righteous, more and more pure, they wouldn't have these problems with negativity, the strange thoughts. They'd be way above it. The Baal Shem is saying just the opposite. The greater the person, the more the negative side is going to go after them. And this actually is said by the sages thousands of years ago. He, though, is applying it to prayer specifically. It says in the Gemara, the bigger the tzaddik, the bigger the evil inclination. So again, it's contrary to what we might think. The greater the tzaddik, we would think, the less of an evil inclination they'd have. But the difference is that the evil, in most cases, the evil inclination that a tzaddik is dealing with is very subtle. It's much more subtle than a lot of evil inclinations of people who are, we'll say, a lower spiritual level. So this is just a very, it needs a lot of thought. It's like, again, if your prayer is kind of empty, they'll leave you alone. If your prayer is powerful, so then expect pushback. And so therefore, it's not like a tzaddik, oh, they have no problem with strange thoughts. They're a tzaddik. It's not true. But nonetheless, the tzaddik has the power to push these thoughts off or to fix them. That we're going to get to. This is one of the deepest teachings of the Baal Shem Tov that I hope we get to tonight. But I mentioned Rabbi Nachman, because Rabbi Nachman, he had tremendous opposition in his lifetime. The Baal Shem Tov also had tremendous opposition. Rabbi Nachman also. But Rabbi Nachman came up with this idea that more or less, the more opposition that you have, the more proof you have that what you're doing is good, is worthy, and you should strengthen yourself and push forward. If you're not doing anything so important, this is from Rabbi Nachman, like, again, the other side is not going to bother with you. But if you're doing something like really good in this world, you have to expect there's going to be pushback. That's just the reality of this world. And you can see where it's coming from. The Baal Shem says it's very, very clearly here. Okay, so we're going to get to this idea. I want to make sure, actually, I get to this idea tonight. In fact, I'm going to do it right now. I'm going to jump ahead because since we mentioned it already. Okay, so this is Kuf Tet Zayin. The second part, Kuf Tet Zayin, is two big paragraphs. I'm in the second paragraph, around 6-7 lines into it. And this is really one of the most important teachings from the Baal Shem Tov that had a major effect on Jewish thought in general. So here and other places, the Baal Shem Tov, because remember, we're not learning every single part of Amunah Tefillah, but he talks a lot about what are called strange thoughts while davening. One of the stories that I'll tell, because I'm going to leave the last few minutes for a couple of stories, that before the Baal Shem Tov passed away, so his students, and it was pretty clear he was going to pass away in the near future, and they asked him, like, Rabbi, like, who do we go to after this? And so he didn't like officially appoint a successor. It was actually his son. His son became Rebbe after him for a year. And at that point, he voluntarily turned it over to the Maggid of Mezrich. It took a great neshama, because his son was a great neshama. But after a year, he came to understand that he is not the right person to lead the new Hasidic movement, and he turned it over to the Maggid. But anyways, so before the Baal Shem passed away, his students asked him, who should we go to for advice? Who will lead us? Who will teach us? And so he said, one of the many things that he said, if you go to someone and you ask them, how do you conquer strange thoughts while davening? And they give you a simple pat answer. In other words, oh, you just do this, this, and this, fixed. You won't have strange thoughts. He said, that's not your teacher. Because anyone who claims that they have an absolute answer of how to deal with strange thoughts while you're davening, they're not for real. Because there is no one answer. There is no formula for dealing with the Yetzer Hara. There is no formula. The Gemara says the Yetzer Hara is working 24/7, and its intent is to kill us. Here's talking about, it could be really physically as well, but certainly spiritually. This is a force that every person has to deal with 24/7. So now, again, we're going to Kuf Tet Zayin. And he says like this, Im nafshecha lumar, b'ma'ida eze machshava litchot, ve'eze likarva ve'alota. So this is a critical teaching right here. A person has a strange thought. It could be a sexual fantasy. It could be thoughts of revenge against someone. It could be hatred. It could be a thirst for power. It could be some fantasy about who the person thinks they are and what is coming to them. There's a million different things that can distract someone, like imaginations, fantasies, or just distractions. You're in the middle of the prayer and just like something from the past jumps at you, something that you're anticipating in the future jumps at you, some fear, some phobia, whatever it is. So the question is, what do you do with that? So the Baal Shem Tov taught, this was a tremendous innovation of the Baal Shem Tov. So he taught that many times these strange thoughts are coming because they want to be fixed. That it's something in your subconscious, your unconscious, that is in great need of fixing. But it comes to you in a very strange, weird, distracting way. So the Baal Shem Tov says that in certain cases, you can take the worst distraction and see through it and see the cry of its desire to be fixed. So that's one side of it. The other side is, what happens if it's just coming to distract you, to throw you off, and that maybe you can't fix it? So that's what the Baal Shem Tov says here. This is fundamental. What do you do when a strange thought goes to you? Do you just push it away, or do you deal with it? In other words, if I'm having this thought, obviously there's something that needs fixing here. How can I fix it? Here he uses the word la'alota, to raise it up. So he says, well, how do you know which one? So he continues, Yitbonen ha'adam im b'sha'a sheba ha'machshava zara, miyad ala b'machshavato letakna, az mistama ba excuse me, I'm sorry. Give me a second. Oh, okay, I'm sorry. I read it wrong. I'm going to say it again. If a person thinks, the thought comes, and a person immediately like meditates on, like, what do I do with this thought? Why am I having this thought? So he says, if at the very moment that this strange thought comes to you, and at the same time it rises up in your mind how to fix it, then raise it up, fix it. Then you can draw it near and you can lift it up. But if he's starting to get sucked in to this negativity, whatever it is, and it doesn't like immediately come to him, oh, I know why this is coming to me. Here's just an example. Let's say, I'm just going to say it in general. Something happens to you. You hit your hand on something. You drop something and break it. Your hand gets caught in the door, whatever it is. And immediately you think, I know why that's happening. Because X, Y, and Z. Because I just said something I shouldn't have said. Because I thought something I shouldn't have said. But it comes to the person, I know exactly why this is happening. It's measure for measure. So that's what he's explaining here. A person gets a strange thought, and it could be a terrible thought, really like ugly, but it comes to them like, that's not like who I really am. This needs to be fixed. In a certain way, I even know why I'm thinking this, or why they're trying to get me to think about this, and it needs to be fixed. Then you could try to fix it. He says, but if you're like getting sucked into the energy and nothing comes to you, that's what he says. Az mistama ba levatel et adam mitefilato. Then you can assume that this thought is coming to confuse a person in his prayer, ulebalbel makshavato, and to confuse his thought. As yesh reshut litcho, then you should push it away. You should push it away. And he says, actually, ki haba lehargacha hashken, because it says in Jewish law, if a person comes to kill you, get up first and kill them. In other words, the right of self-defense. So here he says the same thing. If this thought is coming to ruin your tefillah, throw you completely off, get up and push it away. So here, but the Baal Shem Tov is, there's a gray area here. A tremendous gray area here. It's like everyone is different. And how to know exactly, well, when it says, if it comes to you immediately to fix it, well, what happens if it takes you a little while? Like I think I know what needs to be fixed here. I think I know why this thought is coming. I think I know what inside me is fueling this kind of thought to come to me. So then, he says immediately, well, what does that mean? So that's where the gray area here. But this is a major idea in prayer in general, because we all have distractions when we pray. We all have fantasies. We all have fallen imaginations, all kinds of anger, and just you name it. And when it comes to us in prayer, it's very confusing. So the Baal Shem Tov is saying that sometimes you can actually fix it, and it's even coming to you in order to get fixed. But sometimes it's coming to simply confuse you, and then you need to push it away. You have to be very strong about it, and like it says, like the Gemara says, that the Yetzer Hara it wants to kill you spiritually, intellectually, emotionally. So you have the right to push it away, to kill it before it kills you. Okay, so as promised, I want to tell just a few stories. They're all very short. These are not like long miracle stories of the Baal Shem Tov, but they all have to do with prayer. And for the next few weeks, I'll add a few of these at the end. So one of my favorite is the Baal Shem Tov and his students are in a town that a village that they don't really recognize. It's getting towards Mincha time, the afternoon prayer. The Baal Shem Tov says, can some of you go look for a shul, go ask around, and let's get to a place and we'll daven. So a couple went off. They came back soon and said, yeah, we found a place already. They go, and people are actually, there was no one there. They found the shul, but they noticed there was no one there. So anyways, they get there, and the students, because they had a minyan, so they thought, okay, this is a perfect place. The doors are open. It's a shul. Let's go daven mincha. So they all go in, and the Baal Shem stands at the door and says, I can't come in. The shul is too full. And they say, Rebbe, there's no one here. It's just us. There's lots of room. He said, I can't come in. It's too full. So they know that the Baal Shem is trying to tell them, so they say, Rebbe, what do you mean? He says the shul is so full of prayers that have not ascended to heaven. I can't come into the shul. So that's the whole story. So we can understand there are actually, there's a couple of stories. Actually, I'll tell it right now. There was one, I believe, Yom Kippur, and the Baal Shem's davening on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur was, I'll use the word intense, but that's probably too mild of a word. And at the end, though, he told his students, he said, I was so involved in prayers because I saw an opening to lift up prayers that had not ascended for 80 years. And I was able to lift them up finally to heaven. So this idea of the Baal Shem Tov, without mentioning anything, but I've experienced what he felt before, and I'm sure others have also sometimes been in a shul and felt that it lacked a certain amount of inspiration, elevation, and that there was a certain heaviness of prayers that were just kind of hanging around. It was known that the Baal Shem Tov would, we'll call it, daven in a very, very uninhibited manner. In other words, he would raise his arms. He would sometimes jump up and down. And this is all from people who witnessed it. And that sometimes his face turned like beet red in intensity. Sometimes his face was like ghostly white, that he sometimes would be dancing around the room. and this and people like were in awe of this. It might sound like a little funny if, let's say, you were watching someone daven like this. So we might think like what's going on here? This is like almost humorous. But that's not how the people who davened with the Baal Shem Tov is. They felt the intensity of his prayers, and they felt it as they were praying. So he explained once with a parable, and he said that if someone was standing on the shore and they saw someone out at sea and it looked like they were drowning, and they saw the person like flailing their hands and arms and like screaming out and yelling, help, save me, and just like really going like crazy because they're about to drown. He said, we would understand that. This person is about to physically drown. They are trying to save themselves. And he said, basically, that if this is how a person needs to daven in order to save themselves, then that's how they should daven. So one tradition that was handed down was one time they were davening with the Baal Shem Tov, and in the back of the shul, there were like vessels holding wheat. And this was one of the times where the Baal Shem Tov he was like, they could tell he was just in a different world. And it wasn't even dependent on his gestures. And they noticed, and they themselves were kind of like shaking in awe, because again, they didn't see this as humorous whatsoever, because they felt the energy. If anyone has been in the presence of a holy person, so that they know what I'm talking about, there is a tangible energy that can be felt just by being in the presence, being in the aura, in the vibrational field of a holy person. And so they said that all the wheat in these vessels were shaking. In other words, the energy in the room was so full of the Baal Shem's awe that even the wheat felt it and was shaking. These are short stories, but they give us a picture. The Alter Rebbe is the founder of the Chabad movement, Shneur Zalman of Liadi, also known as the Alter Rebbe. And he was actually born on the same day as the Baal Shem Tov, Chai Elul, which is just as Shabbos was Chai Elul. And actually last week, I told the whole story of the birth of the Alter Rebbe on the Baal Shem Tov's 47th birthday. And what's interesting, Chabad, very much because of the Alter Rebbe, is known for their intellect. That the whole type of Chassidus is very intellectual, very spiritual, but very, very intellectual. So one would think that the Alter Rebbe would probably pray in a very contained way. But interestingly enough, by all reports, the Alter Rebbe's davening was like the Baal Shem Tov. He was all over the place. And just, I'll use the word like wild gestures. But again, the way the people experienced it, it wasn't like weird at all. It was incredible. Because they could see it was for real. That's the whole thing. There was nothing fake about it. It was for real. What's interesting, his son, known as the Mittler Rebbe, he was exactly the opposite. That his davening was, he hardly moved. He hardly moved. And in general, the entire Chabad movement followed in the footsteps of the Mittler Rebbe. And therefore, in Chabad, in general, it's intense on the inside. That was the whole teaching of the Mittler Rebbe, that too many people, because they had these incredible examples of the Baal Shem Tov and the Alter Rebbe and many Rebbes in between, who did daven in a very boisterous way, in a very lots of movement. But the Mittler Rebbe felt that too many people seeing this would try to copy it, and for them it wouldn't be 100% real. It would be more like an influence from a Rebbe, and it wasn't really them, but they're like trying to be like that. And so the Mittler Rebbe was much more, it doesn't mean that his davening was any less intense, not at all, but it was very inner, very what's called pnimi, very inward focused, and not on the outside. Not on the outside. I'll end with one last story for this time. And that is, one time the Baal Shem Tov was davening, and he would daven for hours and hours and hours and hours. And his Chassidim would also daven for hours and hours. But this one time he was taking like so long, and it was clear he was just in a different world altogether. And so they thought, let's go, they were all hungry. Let's go, let's eat something quickly, and we'll come back. And they were sure the Baal Shem Tov would still be in prayer. When they came back, the Baal Shem Tov wasn't in prayer, and he was, use the word like bothered. And he said, "Where did everyone go?" And they could see that, maybe we shouldn't have done that. And they were honest, like, Rebbe, we just, it was just hours and hours, and like, we didn't know when you were coming back. So we just thought we'd have something to eat and then come back. So the Baal Shem Tov says, you have to know, as soon as you left, it broke my concentration. He said, you might think that I'm like davening on my own and I'm not attached to all of you, but I'm completely attached to all of you, even though you might not see it, you might not think it, but like we're one together. And so when you left, it just broke my davening altogether. I felt your not being present immediately. So this is a very very important idea of public prayer, that there is a place for individual prayer and for informal prayer and hitbodedut and hitbonedut and all of that. And then there's a time for communal prayer. And obviously, the closer knit the group is, the more everyone affects everyone else. And I can say I had the great privilege to daven off and on for 20 years with Reb Shlomo. And it was a similar type. His presence was electric and charismatic and full of light and energy. And how he drew everyone together into a common bond in prayer was a very, very, very special thing. It doesn't happen all the time. And a lot of times it's very lacking, to be very honest. But I'll end with a blessing that we all can be part of congregations where we feel a bond with the people, and that the prayers bring us together to feel that oneness.